My name is Megan Haggerty, and I'm going to be talking about the Bourbons in Spain, starting from the beginning of their reign in 1700 to 1789, which marks the year of the beginning of the French Revolution. So let's get started. So here's just an overview of what I'm going to be talking about today, starting off with the War of Spanish Succession, and then getting into the four kings that reigned throughout those 89 years that we saw earlier, so starting with Felipe V, then getting into Fernando VI, Charles III, and Carlos IV. So let's get started talking about the War of Spanish Succession. The War of Spanish Succession started in 1700 and arose out of the conflict regarding the succession of the Spanish throne following the death of Charles II, because he did not have a Habsburg heir. The three principal claimants to the throne were England, the Dutch Republic, and France. However, despite all the disputes, Charles II was finally convinced that only the House of Bourbon had the power to keep Spanish possessions intact. He then designated Philip of Anjou his heir, and Philip was the grandson of Louis XIV. This caused an anti-French alliance to be created between England, the Dutch Republic, and Emperor Leopold due to fear of French hegemony in Europe. They all wanted Archduke Charles to succeed the Spanish throne. Throughout the war, Spain had received support from France financially for all the war efforts. However, they needed to create an administration to extract resources for the Spanish war effort without relying on French treasury. Shortages imperiled administrative reforms, and the war taxation and war levies drove Catalonia and Aragon to revolt against the new dynasty. This establishment of royal rule was seen as a Castilian centralizing imposition on local privileges. Opponents of these reforms were Catalonia, Aragon, and Valencia. Additionally, the church was also threatened into subjection to the monarch. Castile was loyal to the Bourbon dynasty throughout the war, obviously. In 1705, when Archduke Charles took Barcelona, Felipe V tried to attack Catalonia through Aragon, but the Aragonese prevented the passage of the Castilian troops. This revolt turned the king's advisors against local privileges. Felipe V recaptured Barcelona in 1714, and the Decree of Nueva Planta in 1716 abolished the fueros, which are the local villages. This integration is said to be the destruction of Catalan nationality. Felipe V was initially Philip of Anjou, grandson of Louis XIV. He was designated by Carlos II to become the next king of Spain in 1700. He first married Maria Luisa Gabriela of Savoy in 1701, but when she died, he fell into a deep state of depression. His depression prevented him the ability to govern, so he hired bureaucrats to run the government. He hired Giuliano Alberoni, ambassador of Duke of Parma, and then later he married Isabel Farnese, the daughter of the Duke of Parma. After the War of Spanish Succession, Felipe was most concerned with revising the Treaty of Utrecht in order to secure the Italian kingdoms for his sons. There were three phases of his foreign policies, starting with Alberoni, who had an anti-Austrian foreign policy to further Italian ambitions and strove for independence between England and France. John William Ripperda supported allying with France and even with England, and then the bureaucrats, specifically José Patiño and José Campillo, focused on Spain's role in the Mediterranean and trade in Spain's American colonies. All ministers pursued an alliance with France through two Bourbon family pacts, and this made Spain side with France and declare England as the enemy in the wars of the mid-18th century. Spain regained Italian territories from the War of Austrian Succession, fulfilling Isabella Farnese's wants. So the Bourbon family pacts are also known as the Pacte de Famille. I don't know how to say it correctly, but they were three defensive alliances between France and Spain, and they generally involved Spain in European and colonial wars on the side of the French Bourbons. So in the 7 Years' War, they obviously allied with the French, and then they supported French policy during the American Revolution, and then finally when Louis XIV was executed, they supported the English during the French Revolution. Domestically, with Felipe V, we saw a lot of Frenchification in Spanish society and culture, with language, dress, literary style, especially with the nobility. A lot of the palaces imitated French architecture and decorations. Additionally, the administration reform centralized all decision-making processes in Madrid with the king and his ministers, and this was very similar to the way French government was at that time. The Nueva Planta decrees from 1707 to 1716 suppressed the institutions, the privileges, and the fueros of almost all the areas of the Crown of Aragon. So this includes Aragon, Catalonia, Valencia, and the Balearic Islands. All these territories were to be ruled by the laws of Castile, so it would be a new, uniform, and centralized Spain. However, territories such as Navarre and the Basque Country kept their fueros because they supported the Bourbons during the War of Spanish Succession. And then also domestically, there are controversial relations with the Catholic Church over the control of finances and the administration of the Church and the Inquisition at the time. In 1724, Felipe actually tried to abdicate the throne to his son Louis I, which he did. However, Louis I died within 8 months of his succession, so Felipe had to come back into power, so this is why he is known as the king who reigned twice. He constantly battled with depression until his death in 1746, so his wife, Queen Isabel, served as his ally and support through his mental illness. After Felipe V, Fernando VI became king at age 33 in 1746. He's considered the first true Bourbon king because he was actually born in Madrid and he chose to reduce the reliance on France. He was married to Barbara of Braganza. She was of Portuguese descent, and they both enjoyed lavish entertainments of music and orchestra performances because they were unable to fill the void of not having a child. He suffered with depression like his father, and this led to his death in 1759, a year after his wife died. Foreign policy under Fernando VI saw Italy no longer being the focal point of foreign policy. It was actually defined by the actions of his 3 advisors. First off included Jose de Carvajal y Lancaster, and he moved more away from pro-French policy and toward cordiality with Britain. He also tried to mend the hostility with Portugal regarding territorial borders in South America and Brazil. Additionally, Marquis de Ensenada, he was another advisor who was more pro-French and pro-Jesuit, so he focused on finance, the Navy, and the Indies. He created a new concordat with the Vatican. He rebuilt the Navy because he thought that the Spanish should have a naval power, and he tried to implement the Única Contribución. Then, after those two, was Ricardo Wall, and he was pro-English but supported neutrality during the 7 Years' War in 1756. Fernando VI was most notable for keeping Spain out of military conflicts during the 18th century and ending Spain's dependence. Domestic policy under Fernando VI focused on his idea that the pursuit of peace was the best way to serve his people. He continued the reform program and royal building that began with his father. He allowed Spain to adopt its own passions from the Enlightenment for science, governmental reform, and social injustice. He supported regalism, which was the idea of strengthening the power of the crown against the Catholic Church, and he did this by giving Spain's kings the ability to appoint their own bishops and also taxing the clergy. Additionally, there was the Catastro de Ensenada, which was a large-scale census consisting of statistical information conducted by the Crown of Castile. So this information was gathered among about 15,000 places that didn't include the Basque Country, Navarre, or the Crown of Aragon. It included population, territorial properties, buildings, cattle, offices, all kinds of things to gather information about each place. And it originated in a proposal for a single tax, which was Marquis de Ensenada's Única Contribución. Following the death of Fernando VI, Carlos III succeeded the Spanish throne in 1759. He was previously the Duke of Parma and Piacenza and the King of Naples and 2 Sicilies. He is known as one of the most genuine and effective rulers of the Enlightenment in 18th century Europe, and he used his power to increase the well-being of the citizens of Spain. He is known for saying he wanted to apply the law so far as to favor the poor. Foreign policy under Carlos III strayed away from neutrality and instead opposed Britain. He signed a family pact with France, entering Spain into the First Maritime War against England. In this war, Spain did not regain Gibraltar and instead lost 2 ports. In the Treaty of Paris, however, of 1963, Spain regained those 2 ports, Havana and Manila, and even gained Louisiana from the French. However, Spain did lose Sacramento and Uruguay to Portugal and lost Florida to England. At the time of the American Revolution, when France backed the American rebels against England, Spain decided to remain neutral at the time and not get involved. However, Spain was at war with Portugal and won back Uruguay. Then Carlos entered the Second Maritime War against England in support of France, and through this war, Spain regained Florida and Minorca from England in 1783, however, once again failing to regain Gibraltar. At this time, the Spanish-American Empire was at the height of its success under Carlos III. On the other hand, Carlos III focused his domestic policy on economic policies that supported the growing population by fostering growth in production and trade. He viewed agriculture as a foundation of a successful economy, and he used government power to expand farming, and sought approval for his reforms by supporting universities and philanthropic societies. He attacked the Mesta and large landowners, and overruled traditional uses of Spain's natural resources. He even brought in foreign artisans and businesses to create factories for previously imported goods. He sponsored art and music, education reforms, and scientific developments. In spite of all of his reforms, Carlos III saw opposition. When the government removed ceiling prices on grain in the summer of 1765, crisis occurred thereafter when the harvest of that year did not produce enough and ultimately caused an exponential increase in the cost of food. This caused a lot of public unrest in Madrid and other cities and led the Marquis of Squillace to ban long capes and broad-brimmed hats known well to the streets of Madrid. On Palm Sunday in 1766, Squillace ordered officials to cut off the capes and pin the hats of men wearing the prohibited costume, and this order influenced riots in Madrid which spread throughout the region and would become known in Spanish history as the Mutiny of Esquilache. Another aspect of his domestic policy was his claimant to royal authority over the Roman Catholic Church. He blamed the Jesuits for the Mutiny of Esquilache because they supported the Pope, and he dismissed the Concordat from Spain in 1766, and this came along with a lot of pressure from European countries, so then the Pope actually expelled the Concordat in 1783 as well. After Carlos and his ministers slowed the pace of their internal reforms, because they thought that too much, too fast is just causing a lot of problems, and instead they worked to increase the education levels of the clergy and limit the lasting power of the Inquisition. Finally, after Carlos III came Carlos IV. He overtook the Spanish throne in 1788, but he was overwhelmed by the turbulence of the French Revolution. His domestic policy continued the reforms of his predecessors, but it was completely overshadowed by the foreign affairs that were occurring at the time. Bourbon Spain tried to remain neutral, but after the execution of Louis XIV in 1793, Spain did ally with Great Britain against the French rebels. Economic chaos and unprecedented foreign invasion led to Spain's downfall during his reign.